There's a bit of uncertainty with undocumented immigrants wondering if their days here in the United States are perhaps numbered.
Yeah, Rafael Sanchez-Cruz is taking a closer look at this issue.
Jose Rafael says he has noticed a recent shift among the Latino community in Alexandria, Virginia's Chirilagua neighborhood. He says fear has taken hold, with many avoiding even walking in the streets amid President Trump's threats of mass deportations. I don't have that fear because I don't have a criminal record, and Trump said he was going to focus on criminals. But Trump's border czar Tom Homan has said collateral arrests could happen, meaning undocumented immigrants without criminal charges could also be detained during ICE sweeps.
You have to see what President Trump proposes. He often talks about things and doesn't do them.
Virginia Senator Tim Kaine says for now, Trump's deportation proposal is riddled with logistical issues.
How do you create the detention space? How do you pay for the deportation itself? There's no details connected with any of this.
It's that lack of clarity that has undocumented immigrants like Ingrid living in fear.
Terror me pasa por la mente.
Terror. It passes through my mind, my body, everywhere, because sincerely, we don't know what's going to happen. But Ingrid says she has an idea of what could happen. In February of 2017, at least 683 immigrants were detained by ICE in the DMV region, a move many saw as the first wave of the Trump administration's detentions. They said they were going to get people with a criminal record, but unfortunately, there were people that didn't have a record and were still taken. ICE insists they were targeting people with criminal charges.
And I stood with our communities against those kinds of behaviors in 2017, and I'm going to do it again.
Back then, Kaine sent this letter to ICE after 6 Latino men were reportedly detained outside of Alexandria's Rising Hope Mission Church.
Part of what President Trump is threatening is to deport people who have overstayed their welcome or committed crimes, going after folks who've already been adjudicated. I understand.
The Migration Policy Institute estimates that nearly 500,000 undocumented immigrants live in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia.
We are activating defenders networks so that in the event of a raid, targeted action, whatever it might be, if ICE is present somewhere, we know about it.
Ama Frimpong is the legal director for CASA, the largest immigration advocacy group in the DMV region. She says they're prepared to provide targeted resources to immigrant communities, like Know Your Rights workshops.
They have these rights regardless of their immigration status, right? And the first one being you have the right to remain silent.
They also emphasize,
do not let ICE inside your home if they do not have a warrant signed by a judge.
We will begin the largest deportation operation in American history.
I know people that are thinking of only going to work and then going home. I think that's like being in jail and not living a full life in a country that really has received us with love.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our Rafael Sanchez-Cruz to discuss Trump's immigration policies. And Rafa, give us an idea here. What specific logistical challenges are really preventing Trump's deportation plan from really being fully detailed or even implemented?
Yeah, Simone, advocacy groups tell me that without a doubt, they expect to take these battles to the court system as we did during the first administration. But also there's other barriers to put in place Trump's deportation plan. Money. Deporting almost 11 million undocumented people here in the United States would cost $315 billion. I was talking to Senator Kaine just last week, who was telling me that he expects the Trump administration to come to Congress to ask for more funding, but he says this is where they're in control to limit how much money they're really giving the administration to go forward with these plans. And now we heard Homan talk about in your piece, that he needed more beds. So to keep a bed at an immigration detention center running, it costs $57,000 a year. And he's talking about wanting $100,000. We're talking about a lot of money.
Yeah, Rafa. So we heard about CASA there in your last piece. So how does CASA's Defenders Network operate during some of these ICE raids we have seen in the past?
Yeah, Lorenzo. So it's interesting. They send some of their volunteers and some of their members to actually go to these locations where the ICE, sweeps or raids might have happened. And it's important to know this because, look, the immigrant community in our area is on high alert, right? So right now, the presence of any agent, whether it be local or federal police officer, is alarming to them. And there's been situations where the sheriff's office in Prince George's County arrives to apartment buildings in Langley Park and they're executing, an eviction, but the community there, because they are on high alert, they think it's immigration. And then we have people not going to work. We have children not going to school. So they do a full investigation. And then once they determine if ICE was really there, then they will provide resources. What do you need? Do you need an immigration lawyer? What can we do to help perhaps a child that's been left behind because their parent is in custody? You know, they work, it's providing all of the resources that come about after someone is detained by ICE.
Hey, Rafa, you know, you and I talked before we came on here, and I spoke with a local mayor about their concerns about their migrant population and wanting there not to be a target on the back of the community. How are these jurisdictions managing getting the information to the people that need it while protecting them at the same time?
Yeah, Leslie, and I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen now compared to the first Trump administration. I think, you know, years back we saw people being very vocal. This time people are kind of holding that information to themselves, and they're saying they're targeting those communities. They know where these immigrants live, they know what resources they need, but perhaps they're not being as vocal about it. And why? I mean, in Virginia, for example, we're seeing legislation that's been put in place by Governor Glenn Youngkin to essentially cut state funding for jurisdictions that are considered sanctuary. Now, if you go, it's depending what list you look at, there's different jurisdictions that are there. Alexandria, Arlington County that are considered, you know, sanctuary, but then themselves are saying, look, we're doing everything that we can and that we have to do by law to, you know, provide information to federal immigration authorities. They're not really themselves seeing themselves as sanctuary places, but they're saying we welcome our immigrant community. So we're definitely seeing this, you know, holding their cards close, not really going forward with that information, and they're calling it targeted resources. If someone comes to them, they will help them. If they know where these immigrant communities are, they will take those resources to them, but they're not out there publicizing because of this fear that, quote, sanctuary jurisdictions might become a target by state and by the federal government.
Okay, well, to that point, let's talk a little bit about any updates in regard to whether ICE has started collateral arrests, and can you kind of expand on that?
And so this is always a constant issue, because collateral arrests are those people that are undocumented who might be caught up during an ICE sweep and would also be taken into custody. Now, ICE insists that they execute these kinds of operations focused on people that have some kind of criminal record or criminal background. However, anecdotally, we've heard cases and I've met people who have been caught up and that are also taken into custody by ICE. I remember particularly a couple years back, a woman in Maryland who said she opened the door and she did not have a criminal record, but because she's undocumented in this country, she was also, her immigration case to get her deported was started. So there's not new information regarding how they're going about this, but of course, this is what the heightened concern that we have. The idea that you could be at the wrong place at the wrong time and you yourself could be caught up in a deportation case.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the woman that you spoke with in your piece, Rafa, who says it feels like prison. You're just going from work to school and home, and that's it. So how are they balancing the work and family responsibilities right now?
I mean, I think that they're waiting to know what this immigration plan looks like, but it's not rare to get this response, though. I mean, I've talked to people who completely change the way that they operate when there is this heightened fear. Ingrid has been here for 25 years. There are periods where, you know, she limits the time that she's out. She is, you know, takes phone calls from people, and they're all communicating among each other and saying, hey, we saw this happening in this neighborhood. Just stay away for a while, just in case it was ICE that was there doing some kind of ICE raid or an ICE sweep. So they change it all together, and this really does also have a huge implication on our, you know, students, perhaps that were born here in the U.S. You know, the idea that your parent could be taken while you are in school or when they're dropping you off, you know, it does create a huge burden for our school systems nationwide. I know regionally, they're having these conversations with administrators and with counselors saying, if this were to happen, one, you need to communicate it, but two, what resources can we provide to these students who perhaps are immigrants or whose parents are immigrants, and how do we deal with this heightened stress that now that they have to deal with? It's not about, you know, getting that A, it's about, is my family going to be together by the end of when class ends? And that's really hard when you're dealing with young children.
Boy, it can be both traumatizing and paralyzing. So what steps can community members, wherever they are, take to support immigrant neighbors during this time?
You know, Leslie, I was hearing a lot just about the communication of, you know, being there in support and just having that conversation of, you know, perhaps if you are scared and you know your neighbor is maybe vulnerable, doing that outreach, but also just having this network of, if something were to happen, how can I support this family? How can I support a kid whose parents might not be here at the end of the day? And that's really a conversation that needs to be had, and there are plans in place. And I know, briefly you're gonna talk about this further on, but there are people that have full legal plans in place right now in case something were to happen. And this is a time where you kind of get together and support, and I think it's a definitely a conversation to be had, with people that are vulnerable and those that are scared, and just even honestly on a human level, just validating those feelings and saying, hey, I'm here for you.